Okay, how much time does the photographer need in the portrait session? And should there be more time if there's a videographer, since videographers typically repeat shots or do extra shots?
Okay, so I feel like this is so based off of the situation and if they're having a first look and if we're traveling locations or if it's all at the same venue. So I typically like to break it down where we're not just straight shooting the couple for 45 minutes. You know, like if we're having a first look, the first look will be 30 minutes and it will be all of your traditional portraits. And then we'll do 20 minutes directly after the ceremony and then we'll pull back out for sunset. That way I feel like we've got a lot of variety in like different locations, different light. But when there is a videographer involved, I definitely think that more time should be involved, especially if they're wanting that say, if they have specific stuff they want, you know, because, and having those conversations before, knowing that going in, like having to repeat shots whenever you only allot 15 minutes for something is a struggle. So, I mean, I typically like design the timelines to be 30-minute increments for everything. That way, if something falls behind, it's going to make up for it in another 30 minutes because nothing actually takes 30 minutes. But whenever something does and it falls behind, you have caught up. So that's how I found works best for me. And I mean, I've worked with, I feel like a few of you in the room too. So hopefully you guys like that style. But I do think that, yes, whenever there's a videographer involved in the day, like if I'm not talking with that videographer when we send the timeline, whether it's the planner making the timeline and approving it with me or me making the timeline with the bride, like sending it to the videographer, making sure, seeing if they have any questions or like want to add anything on, if they think that they'll need more time, because there's more ideas thrown into the bucket, which in turn, I mean, if we could have an hour for portraits of a couple at a wedding, that'd be great, but that's not realistic. And you don't want to remember on your wedding day, like only taking pictures. You want to be in the moment. So I'm big on like the portraits, like we're moving, it's fun. I want it to be, I mean, obviously, like I said, I want to read my couples. So if they are a more slow, intentional, soft couple, then like we'll hone into that. But if they're running in the fields and picking each other up and that kind of stuff, like we'll kind of lean into what direction, but definitely like get them done. That way they can get to their party. And that's, you know, what they're going to remember with all their people. So I think that's important too.
I think it's important for couples to know the style of the photographer too, because that goes into all of this play. You know, like you said, like read the couple, what they want to do. Because if you're like obviously for us, if we're working with an editorial style photographer, it's harder for us because they just want to do specific poses, no movement.
And so then you have to do something totally different, and it will take more time because it's not,
So that communication on the front end helps a ton.
For sure.
And you may not even be a good fit for that couple if the photographer is editorial and you're more adventurous, or, you know, obviously not necessarily adventurous, but like you need some movement. And the photographer, if the photographer isn't going to work with that, then it might not work on the wedding day. So.
Yeah. And I feel like that's what like we as vendors, I feel like try and stress to couples before booking, you know, like we want couples to see our style and book us because they love like our work and they want, like they see themselves in that. So, I mean, I feel like that should be the same for the photographer and videographer, you know, like those two go so hand in hand. Why would they hire completely different styles?
It happens a lot.
But it happens, I know. Oh, yeah. I definitely like way more on I mean, I feel like I get some standstill portraits, definitely pre-wedding day. I have a lot of brides who quite literally don't want to move before the ceremony to get their dress dirty, you know. But then after ceremony, I'm definitely an advocate of like, we're letting loose. We're getting these like adventure shots. So I feel like videographers typically like they want movement. I feel like for the most part. Yeah. So I feel like that kind of, at least at the end, hopefully like check some boxes for everybody. But yeah, I don't know if I missed anything.
Good job.
That's it? Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna get in the car and I'm gonna be like, I forgot so many things that I wanted to say.
I did that on the way home last time, except I was like, wow, I said too much.
I'm thinking about like me earlier being like, sometimes I'm sassy, and I'm like, these people are going to be like, she can be sassy. And I'm like, I'm really never sassy.
No.
I'm really not.
But we can be real because we've seen it all and we are all here.
Sassy ever, it's probably,
because I'm not fed.
it's because I'm not fed. The only time I've ever been sassy on a wedding day was they wouldn't feed me and I got quiet. I was very professional, but it was what I would call sass. It was professional sass. I may have told them that I was never referring to them again, but that's when they refused to feed me, and then it got to where I wasn't going to get to eat at all. And I'm one that brings snacks, and I usually don't like say anything, but they were being very mean to me. So I finally just went to them and told them. I was like, you know, I was, yes, okay. Yeah, it was like, and I told them that like, you know, I unfortunately, like, I'm supposed to eat. It's in my contract. I understand if things get behind, but they were like an hour behind serving food, and, you know, told them because they wouldn't serve me, I'm not going to get to eat now, and I'd been working for 10 hours, and unfortunately because of this and their attitude, I was never going to refer them, and I walked away. And
that was fine.
And that was professional sass, and I have never referred that, and I hated saying that, but I was just like, I was hangry. So,
as you should.
As I should.
But that's the only time you'll ever see sass from me. So I just wanted to clarify that. That was dwelling on me. It was no. They ended up giving me a plate of mush. It was literally like peas and leftover things, and I was like, okay.
Somebody else's plate?
It was somebody else. Probably. It probably was. Oh, Lord of mercy. I'm like, why is it hard to get vendors food? Okay, that's a whole other discussion.
We could talk for hours on this. I know. It's my fault.
It was my fault.
No, and I built on it. Okay, ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Toasts are a big piece in a wedding film. How should a videographer work with the photographer during the toasts?
Okay, so I don't know about for you guys, but toasts just really aren't that big of a deal for me as a photographer. I'm gonna be honest. I mean, I don't really move around a ton. Usually I have a second photographer, like they're getting the one who's giving the toast, I'm getting the couple. I just don't, toast isn't like a big highlight for me. So whatever I can do to make the toast as easy for the videographer as possible. I recognize that they have several different cameras going. I wanna make sure I'm not like standing in front of it, moving back and forth. Definitely just stay low. I try to like stay low because I feel like, especially if they're like in the front and the guests are all like around here, I already feel like I'm in the way of the guest. And then also with video, they have to usually stand. So I just try to stay, I either shoot, you know, a long focal length so I can just stay back. I do typically use flash during the reception. Most typically just know that and they just kind of go with it. But no, for me, the reception is usually like the least creative besides maybe the details. So I just, whatever's easiest I just look at the videography, be like, tell me where to stand. And I will, as long as I can get a good shot of everything, then I'm pretty much good to go. It's not as big of a deal for me. I don't know if that's.
You know what? We thank you for your service.
I just don't, it's not a big, I'm usually by the time I get the reception, I'm tapped out.
Reception, we decompress.
Yeah, I'm like, it's
The
so
reception
easy.
is when I'm like,
because I'm like, I'm ready to just eat cake. And she's like, oh my gosh, I gotta talk to the DJ, make sure I can plug in. And I'm like,
there's also only so many photos that they want of people talking and like their mouths opening in awkward ways.
There's only so many ways.
Yeah, and it's honestly for me, it's mainly about like I'll get a couple photos of the person speaking, but the guest, the couple, like, and like you said, you know, the only time I'm getting in close, like not even close, but if it's good enough lighting or if I'm shooting black and white film, like my focal length is not, you know, I don't have a 105 or something for the film camera, but I might go in for just like one or something and then kind of
Especially if
come back
they're
out.
like holding hands really cute or
and
something.
Yeah, but those are like I'm being aware of where they set up, and I'm usually like crouching underneath the camera, and they're usually like, "You're fine," and I'm like, "I don't want to get in your way." Like army crawling. Yeah.
It's like steak. Like, let me take your plate.
I know. I'm just like, but it is. I'm the same way, and I do because I feel like sometimes I just feel like I'm in the way. But I think for video, like you're hearing people, you're hearing the speeches, you're getting the audio of that, and that's huge. It's a huge moment. And I feel like more important.
And a lot of them will say, they'll bring lights and say, "Oh my gosh, like tell me if you're." I'm like, "No, I love it. Just I will work."
Like extra lights. The more
Yeah.
lights,
Yeah.
the less lights.
I want to be I'm like, I've been fed usually at that point.
Yeah.
So I'm very easy.
Usually.
I'm very non-confrontational. Whatever. I don't care.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to either, but.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Yeah.
Just to follow up, it sounds like the answer is probably not much, but is there any, as you guys are just saying, is there anything that we can do for you all in that moment that we can be more sensitive to?
I would say sensitive. I would just, there are some videographers that maybe don't speak up as much about what they need. And I don't know if this is just because a lot of videographers, unfortunately, come across just very rude photographers. I don't know if that's just common in the industry, unfortunately.
Sometimes.
So I want to make sure that they know that, like, please tell me what you need, because I want to be out of your way. But no, not so much sensitive towards me, but I would rather them, be open to me, like exactly what they need, because I think maybe some might feel like, oh, I don't want to be like in the way. No, like, as long as they're not like right behind them, definitely.
Hopefully no videographer is ever like just behind them.
I wouldn't say that. There's like the 90s camera. Those are fun. Have you ever dealt with those?
I have.
I mean, no offense if anyone's like vintage shooting. It's an aesthetic. I'm not talking like a Super 8. I'm talking like,
The pouch is being
recorded, yes.
VHS.
Yeah, the dad cam, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay.
Okay. Is there a preference on how photographers like to shoot during the reception? I feel like you've already
No.
touched on it.
Now, I think there's a difference between like, if it's like a really dark setting. I really like when video brings some extra light. I think it's kind of nice. Gives some nice like halo to the hair during the dances. I think dances sometimes
I feel like we have to do a dance with you.
Yes, because I'm really bad
We're
about.
all rotating at the same time.
I'm like, wait a minute. If they can see me, I can see you.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh wait, I need to move. So I'm sometimes need to be more conscious about like when we're rotating around them, like don't.
And I always ask where I have my stationery. Is this a good spot for you?
Yeah.
Because like once it's set, I'm not gonna,
And if it's an outdoor reception, it's so nice because there's just so much more freedom to run around. And but yeah, I don't know. I'm just so laid back with the reception. I don't really have a lot of input.
I feel like I am too. I feel like that's where I can just kind of like, okay, like our hard part's over and your hard part has begun. So no, not really.
I mean, most of this hard stuff for me is over. Yeah. I will say though, and I think we've had this conversation, Alice and I are best friends, by the way, so we talk a lot. The sparkler exit can be a little challenging with a video, especially if they're shooting really wide. I found usually the best is just us kind of walking back together. I've had some videographers want to be like track the couple really close the whole way, and then I'm trying to like kind of get around them.
Which is acceptable on the second run through.
Yes, if it's like a long, but sometimes that can be challenging.
And if they're short, it's every man for himself. You're shoulder to shoulder, and you get what you get.
Yeah.
If they buy the long ones, we can do it 3 times.
Yeah, which is nice.
Wide, close up, and from behind.
Yeah.
We had a wedding. Tatiana and I had a wedding the other weekend, and they started it when we were still inside the barn. Like, we were literally talking to the couple. It was at Ashford, and like, wishing them well, whatever. The sparklers are all lit outside. We didn't know it. And then they're like, oh, we're going. And they literally sprinted. And like the start of it was here, but we needed to be here. And we were like sprinting into the exit. And we're like, Did you get anything? 'Cause I don't know if I got anything.
It was a little bit tipsy.
Yeah.
Carry the bride.
A little bit.
It's just like me running backwards as fast as I can.
Yeah.
I think the hardest part, like I've had videographers before where there's only been one, and they, like this happened to me back in April, and they wanted to just get from behind. So they didn't want the front, and so like he was in every single photo of mine. Which, again, I know photography can edit out things, but it is more work on the back end. And so that was the only thing, and they only did it one time. And so I think in that circumstance, if I had known prior to that moment that he was only going to do it from that side, I would be like, can we do it twice? But a couple like got in the car and went away. I was like,
I always tell them, let's at least, if they're
yeah.
long. Now, if they just buy the short ones, you
Yeah.
only got one shot.
yeah. And it was interesting because, I don't mean, it's fine, but that doesn't happen very often. So that's the only thing where I'm like, okay, we need to communicate better and know that like this is what's happening. Because there's really no way of blocking,
Like
hiding that.
Right.
But yeah, they typically it's like fun. Although I'm ready for a different trend over sparkle accents. After I had a lit one ran through my hair, I was done. Yeah, it was like alcohol on me. Lit sparkler through my hair. I literally stopped and I ran because I didn't know if I was on fire. I wasn't.
The time they are so tragic because
They usually are.
I'm like, do a ceremony send off because because unless your guests are sober and you guys are sober or semi.
Good old confetti, biodegradable. Out of the church. Oh yeah, bubbles.
Well, I think the back down the aisle is becoming more popular. I've noticed,
Yeah,
like
it
the
is.
petals down the aisle, which I really like.
Yeah, those are neat.
Or the confetti cannons, something like
Yeah,
that.
and it's a way too. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I'm
go.
sorry.
No, you're good.
But it's a way too when they do that to prevent us from having to stay until the very end of the wedding.
They didn't pay us.
Yeah, because at least for photography, it is obviously I know it's different for video because movement and everything, and you're getting to actually see people dancing. But like, if I'm there for 3 hours of open dancing, it's the same people over and over and over again. And then you have people being like, "Why aren't you moving?" And like, I'm like, we had a wedding together, and this guy was like, "Why are you staying in the same spot?" And I'm like, "Listen."
And then you just feel creepy. You're like, I'm so sorry, but there's 4 people on the dance floor right now.
I'm like,
And you're one of them, so you better work.
I'm literally standing there just like pressing the button on the flash that makes it go off just to pretend because I'm like, I don't need the same photo of the same person. I literally just don't tell any potential couple that might know because
No, I'm
it's
gonna
just
steal
too
that.
much.
I do photo as well, so I'm gonna start.
It's just too much. So I'm all for the ceremony exit release. Really.
No, I totally like it. Let's do it.
Oh,
Let's make it
jeez.
happen.
It's a movement. Okay.
Videographers want to be treated more as a team player and not as someone who tags along. How best can videographers build that teammate relationship?
So I like the tag along because I've actually had videographers look at me and say, I just want to tag along. And I feel like that's actually very common. I've had so many say that to me. However, I definitely want them to know that I want them to input, and I will tell them, please let me know what you want to do. But as far as the team building, and I kind of piggyback what you were saying earlier, I think the team building starts before the wedding. I have always been, as much as possible, to reach out to the videographer before the wedding, especially if I've not worked with them. And like you said, afterwards, it's just kind of more of a, we're excited to work again. And I asked her as a videographer, if a photographer contacted you and said, hey, we never worked together, I'm really excited, here's the timeline, how would that make you feel? And you said, oh, I would actually, I'm like, I would know this is a good day.
Yeah, I would like, okay, I've got good vibes going on.
Yeah. And so that's what I've been really trying to do recently, is as soon as we get the timeline, jump right to the videographer. That's usually the first person I try to contact besides like the venue. Because once you, again, I come in peace, and then you give them the, you know, the contract. I typically do the timeline with the couple, and then if it's like your situation where you have a coordinator that makes one, we just kind of bounce back and forth. I just want to, because there's some videographers that have never seen the timeline.
Yeah.
They just don't get it, unfortunately, which, unless they, I don't, it's crazy to me that they don't get it. So I'm like, here's this. And then maybe if I've noticed they shot at the venue and I haven't, I'll start asking questions. And I just want to build that rapport with them before the wedding. So hopefully when we actually meet each other, they know like I'm very accepting to their ideas, because I like it when they jump in and say, oh, actually I've shot here. This is a really cool spot over here. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Or like, let's hang the dress here.
Yes.
I'm like, nice. I don't have to walk all the way around indecisive.
Everyone's season is like this for photography. I'm sure it's like this for video too. Like, if I'm taking a picture of something or at a venue, like, just because someone else is also taking pictures, they're not, and we could be looking through the same exact camera, we're not seeing something the same way. Yeah. We have different eyes, we have different perspectives, and so I think hearing that, like I've had, you know, videographers be like, hey, I want to do something, and then they're doing it, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I'm like, you know, like over their shoulder, and so I think that it's good to like.
It's more fun that way too.
Fun, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like when you are like one with the photographer or the videographer, you produce a better quality product for the client when you're meshing versus when you're like butting heads. Yes. So for sure, I think the team building is really, really important. And I think too, having, you know, we both have the same end goal of having beautiful content. You know, I recognize that a videographer, like we mentioned before, they need a little bit more movement. They want a little bit more kind of romance. And I feel like, I don't know if you're like this, I can be a static shooter because that's just kind of, I like the classic portrait. So I've really, especially working with more and more videographers, I'm very big about now to kind of get them moving. And then like you said, if they have an idea, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Yeah. Like, why didn't I think of this? Yeah. And then we both are winning for the client.
I think it like draws inspiration. Like you draw inspiration from each other, which in the end is going to help the couple in the long run because they're getting, I mean, you know, they're not getting the same photos. I think as a photographer, it's very easy, especially if you're in like the heat of the season and you're just having weddings all the time, to just go in auto mode and you're doing the same thing over and over and over again because you're just exhausted. So it's so great to have a different perspective and to have new ideas to where you can just bounce ideas.
The client can feel that. They can feel that we're meshing. And then I think people notice, you know, like the bridesmaids, the groomsmen, the family. So they're, you know, I feel like they're, especially if they're engaged and we don't know that, you know, they're kind of looking on how we're working. I feel like that's how we get a lot of our destination weddings together, is we just work so well together. And we kind of sell, of course we sell each other a little bit, you know, but when you get to work with someone that you really respect and you love, you just work so much better together. You trust what's happening.
And you look forward to the day more, like knowing that you have that relationship already. Yeah, that you're not alone.
When you have to show up and like make friends with someone,
It's like first day of school vibes.
it's a lot of pressure, and like in the first 5 minutes I know like, okay, it's gonna be good, or we're gonna have to like struggle with this for a little while. But typically, like, I've got like a pretty big group now of people I know, like how they work. I'm like, okay, I'm with Meredith, I'm not gonna have to speak up a lot, maybe a little bit, but you can just read my mind. And then others, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to like really chime in. And for a long time I didn't want to, but now I will.
It is like comforting when you know the person that you're working with and you've experienced it, because it is like that. Like every time I'm working with someone new, I'm like, they're gonna think I'm insane because I like lay out all of my detail stuff and I take my shoes off immediately. Like I can't do details with my shoes on. And then they're probably like, why is it taking you 20 minutes to do this invitation suite lay flat? And it's like, because, you know, like things like that. It just
Or like I'm making a, you know, millennial commercial reference, and the photographer's like, I'm 19, what are you talking about? And I'm like, okay, I'm just not gonna talk to you anymore. I'm sorry.
I graduated college then. But
Awesome. So the last question is basically, like, this could be spicy, but let's learn learn from it and encourage one another. What are some misconceptions that videographers might have about photographers?
That we hate them. That we hate them.
We are superior.
Yeah.
Although I do feel like sometimes there are photographers that probably think they are superior. You know, but I'm not one of them.
No, we're friendly.
Yeah, we're friendly. We come in peace.
Yeah, we do. No, I think, and the only reason why I'm saying this is because, again, from you and from several videographers I've worked with, they would tell me horror stories of photographers being so rude to them, stepping in front of them on purpose, just like almost like showing dominance, like I'm the head, you're the second. And I just think that is such a wrong way to look at it. And I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if it's just where, obviously, photo as a medium has just been around a little bit longer than video, but I feel like, I don't know, video is so much cooler. There's just, it's like a movie.
But it's a story that photo can't tell. That's what I feel like.
We only just get like hiccups in between, and they get the whole thing.
It's just like the feel that takes you back, and it's like the audio and the real time. So, I mean.
But maybe, and again, a misconception that we don't want your input, we actually do. And unfortunately, you might have run through photographers that just don't care about your input. But I feel like as photographers, we need to strive more to know that they want.
And it actually gives us a break, because it's easy to get in that gear where you're like, all right, here's my mental checklist. Like, here's the bride's mental checklist that I know she has told me she wants. So, like, this is everything going through my head. But, like, when you step in as a videographer and give in your input, then I'm like, okay, I can, like.
Or sometimes you speak up and you're like, actually, I'm going to have you all do this. And they're like, no, we're not doing that. And then they just walk off, and I'm like,
That's rough.
okay.
I feel like all of my growing, it's been because of all of your horror stories.
I'm happy to help.
And then the couples can just feel that tension, and you're like, okay, this is really awkward.
Usually, I mean, I just go with the flow.
I've only had one really bad videographer. Thankfully, it was in Georgia. It wasn't in this area, and I don't know. I don't know what was. I think, honestly, she knew I was from Kentucky, and she thought I was like just trash, I guess. I don't know. She's like, oh, you're from Kentucky. I'm like, I don't know. I like Kentucky.
Around barefoot and eating fried chicken all the time.
Yeah, I think she just thought I was like a hick or something.
People like say that to me. Like they asked if I walk around barefoot and had everything fried, and they asked if our grass was really blue, and it was.
Like sometimes, yeah.
I'm like, I look at them and I'm like, does people really think this? Like, is that the perception of what Kentucky is? But okay, that's fine.
But yeah, I feel like, unfortunately, though, some of the misconceptions is because sometimes it is reality on the fringe.
What are misconceptions that you all as videographers have about photographers? Like, I guess it would be a good flip it.
I don't know, I'm thinking, you go.
For me, it's probably similar. So I think when I get face-to-face with you all, I hear so many good stories. So I'm being honest when I say I think so much of it is garbage on social media. People feel comfortable sharing all the stuff there, and I think that's where we hear it. So I think some of the groups and forums I'm a part of is what I hear. And so if I have misconceptions, it's probably actually stemming from there and not my actual experiences. So I'm sorry if I ever bring that, because it's not from you all.
You mean like maybe something said bad about someone, and then is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so an example, I think the most that I've seen is usually people stepping in front of them. Typically ceremony or cutting off and not sharing time during the bridal portraits. I just don't get that. I'm so comfortable and love working with people on the wedding day. And so I'm willing and comfortable to just talk with people. So I don't feel like I experience that much, but I've had moments like that happen. And so, but yeah, so I don't know. I don't have a big...
I think I just worry that I'm being annoying or being like a nuisance to speaking up. Yeah. And I know that I'm not, but sometimes like the vibes that are put off is that like they really just don't want my opinion. Like they just want to do what they want to do. Right. But typically it's probably just in my own head, because I've had a lot of experiences in the past where it was like that. Yeah.
They made you feel that way. Yeah. So that's sad.
You're kind of like projecting a little bit.
I think so.
But you don't mean to. Yeah.
So that's why I just save it for Paige and we talk on the way home.
Well, and sometimes there's really stressful client interactions. You know, maybe there's, you know how it is, you know, unfortunately there's some tension in the family of the couple, and that already brings a little bit of a cloud on the day. And we try to be as mediators as much as possible. We try to keep the peace. And, you know, we're thankful it's not between us, but unfortunately we are kind of in that realm of uncomfortability, especially like family portraits, things like that can have a little bit of a, you know, a situation that we have to know about.
Yes.
So I think having, if that's already there and then there's tension with the photo video team, it's going to be a very turmoil day. So I think having a really solid photo video team and walking into a situation that might be a little bit uncomfortable, I think that's really important.
That makes me think of the wedding we had together.
The whole time I cried.
So we had a wedding, yes, and I'm so thankful that, I mean, I hate that we both had to experience this situation, but if I had been working with someone that I wasn't super comfortable with, like that's one thing I love when we work together, like we just know what each other's gonna do. Like I don't know what would have happened because this is the only time I have ever literally told my second shooter, like, you need to take over right now. Like, I have to leave this situation because I was mentally unwell because of how rude the groom was. We were treated very poorly. And so, like, I had to step away and second shooter had to take over. And, like, you know, Allison had her moment.
Yeah, he didn't want to put my mic on. And because the church had already given him a mic and it just didn't look good to have 2 microphones on. And I'd had conversations with the bride. She really wanted the vows from their ceremony. So I knew, like, if I don't get this mic on him, they're not going to have any audio. He didn't care. When I get angry or like really nervous, like I'm gonna start crying. So I started crying to the planner. The planner had to convince him and I had to have Paige put it on him because I was like shaking. He was just like really nasty about it. But it was a lot. It was definitely a lot.
It was a very stressful situation, and not to mention the rehearsal dinner was 4 hours long of speeches, which I felt so bad. It was like 4 hours, right?
I almost brought that up earlier, yeah. Because you were just like leaning on the wall, like, oh, no, here.
Yeah, so that was a situation where I was like, yeah, and she was like, but all of that to say was that, like, if I had been with someone else or someone that I didn't know, that could have ended up being a really bad, because the good thing is like, we, not only did we have our assistants, but like we knew that if I needed to come to her and be like, hey, because that's when I lost a roll of film too, and I was like, can you help me scour the grounds for this roll of film that was gone? We found it, it was good. But like, I felt comfortable enough to come to her and be like, we need to support each other. So we were not only like supporting each other in what we were doing on the wedding day, but like personally too. And I think that's a big thing as well. So yeah.
I remember one wedding we had, the mother got in a car accident. The groom had texted her and she read it, and I feel like as photographers and videographers, we're like photographer, and then we're like a therapist, and then
And a
coordinator, and we sometimes the florist, so the flowers fall apart, you know. And
Pin in the boutonnieres.
Yeah, pin the boot, all the things. I need to learn how to tie. That's one thing I need to learn how. But it's so nice to just look at the vendor team. And it's like, we need to come together for this couple. And I feel like we all have been in those moments where we've kind of saved the day.
Yeah.
Because we're there all day. We're behind the scenes. They trust us so much to be a part of their.
We're who they spend majority of like
The day with,
yeah. So like picking a vendor team is that's who we're with them more than their bridal parties with them or their families with them. So meshing for them is so important. Like, you don't want them thinking, oh, that videographer and photographer hated each other. Like, that was awkward. For what? It's their day. Like, make it about them.
Yeah. And I think too, like talking, like you were talking about, like we as photographer and even videographers too, like we end up being more on the wedding day. So like, even though like I primarily work with people that have full service planners now, while I'm not doing as much, I'll say, planning on the front end, I'm still doing things on the wedding day. And so I think like looping in on certain aspects of the day, like looping in the planner if there is one, is is an important thing too. Because they're going to know everything that's supposed to be happening. And because there's been times where like we just, like I've communicated with the videographer beforehand, but we've shown up to the day of and the planner like is like, oh, something's changed, or like this has moved and we weren't notified of it, and just making sure that like we are also notified of any changes that have taken place. And usually planners are pretty good, but I've also had some issues with that as well, where we haven't been notified beforehand. Right. So I think that also like looping them in, if there is one, for certain things, is probably a good decision too.
Especially just confirming like what time you're leaving. Because I've had some say, oh, you're here till 10. Like, no, I'm actually here till 8.
Yes.
And then they're like, oh, they wanted you here till 10.
Yes. And then like making sure you get paid for those hours. Because
The extra
I love planners, hence me only doing weddings with planners now. But for the most part, but that's one thing I have noticed. Some of them will like just be like, oh yeah, we're gonna just add on this time to the end and not really say anything sometimes, and almost like expect it to be free time that you give them, especially if it's just like 30 minutes, and that is time that you should be paid for. So anyway, that's my little TED talk.
Agree.
Like, there's so many other avenues. I'm like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about food. Let's talk about like.
Scott, is there anything that you want to chime in on the last question?
Well, kind of not really a misconception or anything, but like I guess I was gonna say go back to like working with a photographer. This is from videographer's perspective. Working with a photographer that you don't know, like obviously at the beginning of the day, say if I get in your way and stuff like that, just the normal stuff, and glad to work with you and stuff. But like Luke Metzger, I know some of you might know him. He's from the same town as me, and one thing he said that he does is if he's working with a photographer he hasn't worked with before, and he usually will try to nip it in the bud early, but like if he feels like the photographer is more of, not letting him do anything or just moving really fast and not asking him if he needs anything, he will kind of try to catch a moment with the photographer and say something like, so do you feel like you're getting what you need? Do you feel like, things are going well so far? And if it's, he'll usually ask that if he's not getting what he needs. That way he can bring it up and say, well, I'm not getting really what I feel like I usually get, or something like that, just to kind of
Open up
make that aware,
Yeah.
So.
That's a good way to approach it.
That's good.